Greetings, fellow men of culture. This broadcast is, as always, live from the peak of Thundercock Mountain. Before we had smartphones and fleshlights to keep us occupied on the toilet, we had shampoo bottles and handheld gaming consoles. Not me, I just shit my pants because I'm a man. From the microvision that paved the way for the concept, all the way to the crazy portable PCs we have nowadays that can play AAA games at 60 FPS and die in 40 minutes, handhelds have been around nearly as long as home video game consoles themselves. I used to bring my DS to school and play a little during lunch, until I heard the gym teacher getting one of my classmates pregnant. I thought God was punishing me for playing video games during school time. A surprising number of handhelds have come and gone, but a few stand above the rest in terms of library and enduring legacy. So in this video, I want to go over the top 10 handheld gaming consoles of all time. When they were at their prime, Sega was constantly nipping at Nintendo's supple ass cheeks, trying to take as much of the video game market as they possibly could. Sega had a rival console for every Nintendo release: the Master System for the NES, the Genesis for the Super Nintendo, and the Game Gear for the Game Boy. Sega squirted out the Game Gear in 1990 as a direct competitor to the massively popular Game Boy, and it had some impressive features for the time. Unlike the Game Boy's monochromatic screen that was so hard to see it looks like it was smothered in thick, syrupy cum, the Game Gear had a full-color backlit LCD display. The colors, combined with the visuals that were nearly on par with the Master System, made for a handheld that was way ahead of its time. But these features came with some nasty backshots that made it a hard sell for potential customers. This thing ate batteries like I ate my grandfather-in-law's ass. It took 6 AA batteries to power this bitch, and that would only get you 3 to 5 hours of playtime. Either you had to invest in some rechargeables, or the Game Gear was essentially a subscription to batteries. It was also huge, which made it cumbersome to take around. All of its fancy graphics came at a high price point as well. The Game Gear launched at $150, compared to the Game Boy's $90, and that price difference is huge. It sold 10.5 million units before it was discontinued, and the Game Gear has gained a bit of a cult classic status. A few of the console's games have resurfaced here and there in Sonic Collection games, as well as a few of them being sold in a 3DS Virtual Console. Sega may have gotten a little too ambitious with the features and price point at its launch, but the Game Gear has stood the test of time to earn its place as a fondly remembered classic. Neo Geo has a weird track record when it comes to making hardware other than dedicated arcade cabinets. The Neo Geo AES was their first home console, offering exact arcade gameplay at home, which was incredibly ambitious. While there wasn't enough dick to suck behind the KFC to afford one of these monstrosities. Their attempt at taking over the handheld market was similarly ambitious when it comes to taking on Nintendo. Although the Neo Geo Pocket Color didn't cost my firstborn son's liver to purchase. It released in 1999 as a direct competitor to Nintendo's Game Boy Color. This little butt plug has some really cool features that are well remembered today. The 2.6-inch full-color screen was bright and sharp, and the micro-switch thumbstick was so good I don't know why it hasn't been replicated since. The Pocket Color's biggest problems were lack of third-party support and overwhelming competition from Nintendo. After 1 year on the market, the second generation of Pokemon games were released exclusively for the Game Boy Color, and the Pocket Color might as well have never even existed. Despite low sales, the console does have some quality titles. SNK vs. Capcom was great to play with the precise thumbstick. They got a couple of Metal Slug games, and even got some Sega sloppy seconds with a Sonic game. When it comes to specs and library quality, the Neo Geo Pocket Color should have been neck and neck with Nintendo, but the pop culture phenomenon of Pokemon and the greater sales of the Game Boy Color led the Pocket Color to die an early death, marking the end of Neo Geo's involvement in the home video game market entirely. Bandai isn't particularly well known for their gaming hardware. They're the guys that put out a dozen mediocre anime arena fighters every year since 2007, with thousands of dollars of costume DLC. But they did try to flaccidly penetrate the handheld market in 1999 with the WonderSwan. A year later, they improved upon it with the WonderSwan Color, all exclusively in Japan. Gunpei Yokoi, the designer of the original Game Boy, was on board during the WonderSwan's development, but he passed away before it launched. The WonderSwan Color boasted some really strong third-party support with companies like Squaresoft, Namco, and Capcom all releasing games that seemed to perfectly appeal to a Japanese audience. Homegrown licenses like Digimon, a bunch of One Piece games, and remakes of Final Fantasy 1 and 2 all helped the WonderSwan Color gain some strong initial sales. However, our villain Nintendo can't keep their dick in their pants and had to release the Game Boy Advance in 2001, 1 year after the WonderSwan Color launched. As it usually goes, the Game Boy took over nearly the entire handheld market, not just in Japan but worldwide. Although it didn't last very long on the market, the WonderSwan Color is praised today for its potential as a Nintendo competitor at the time. It has a great library of games, a nice screen, and it's still floating around here and there with screen mods and aftermarket parts and shells to keep the old units alive and playable. The first handheld console to not get absolutely crushed by Nintendo's offerings at the time was the PlayStation Portable. Although it failed to beat the DS in terms of commercial success, The device was incredibly impressive at the time, featuring a widescreen aspect ratio, games that from a technical perspective were far more advanced than what was possible on the DS, as well as multimedia functionality like being able to play MP3s of Ram Ranch and watch movies. PSP also had a great library going for it. 2 God of War games that hold up really well, a Ratchet & Clank game that was well received, and Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, which a lot of Western Monster Hunter fans cite as their first and favorite Monster Hunter game. GTA Liberty City Stories blew my tiny virgin mind when I saw it for the first time. It was crazy to see an entire GTA map that I was used to seeing on my TV at home on a little handheld gaming device. It wasn't all fent flopping in rainbows though. The lack of a second analog stick made certain genres hard to pull off on the PSP, and its proprietary physical medium, the UMD, was fragile and expensive to produce. Sony's marketing in the West didn't do it any favors either. They focused heavily on the multimedia aspects of the PSP, and the only people this device really appealed to was gamers who primarily care about the games. People who wanted an MP3 player had tons of options at the time that were much smaller and cheaper than the PSP. Some consider the PSP a failure since it didn't dethrone the filthy king, but it sold 80 million units worldwide, making it the 4th best-selling portable console ever. It continues to have a strong cult fan base with a big community of homebrew developers and modders working on the device. An argument could be made that the Steam Deck isn't exactly portable. It's a big beefy boy, but it is a handheld and it has a crazy amount of features that tickle my pickle. Steam Deck wasn't the first device to attempt a handheld PC form factor, nor is it anywhere near the most powerful, but it is in my opinion the first one to get it right. Valve hits a great compromise between performance and price, coming in at easily the best starting point for a modern handheld PC, with more powerful competitors costing more than double in some cases. For the basic user, it's just a handheld gaming device. Boot it up, log into Steam, and install your games. If you don't want or need anything more than that, the Steam Deck is great. But if you really want to dig in, there's way more to it. You can dual boot to Windows, add other game launchers like Epic and good old games. This thing has the juice to emulate pretty much everything up to and including some Xbox 360 and PS3 games. And there's an easy app to set all that up. There are some big drawbacks, however. Like most handheld PCs, this thing sucks battery juice like grandma sucking a hot dog through a water hose. With some intensive games, you can hardly get more than an hour and a half of gameplay before it's dead. With lighter games, you can sometimes get about 5 to 10 hours depending on the fat load. The best value proposition for the Steam Deck was recently discontinued when Valve announced they would stop producing the base LCD model, leaving only the OLED model still in production. You're still looking at a good price, but those LCD models were such a great value. Steam Deck deserves a place on this list because of its versatility, ability to play pretty much everything from past generations, access to the massive Steam library, and the fact that this thing is over 3 years old at the time of writing and people are still recommending the Steam Deck over its much more powerful competitors. The Nintendo DS marked a turning point in the handheld gaming market. Not only was its design super weird and unique, it was the first time we got real 3D graphics on a mass-market gaming device. Not weird 3D like on the GBA, the DS had a dedicated 3D rendering engine. While more modern handhelds blow this out of the water, the DS was released in 2004. This little piece of shit blew my mind. I was in grade 8 when I first played my friend's DS, and it was amazing seeing a first-person Metroid on a little screen. An entirely separate touchscreen was also novel at the time. It wasn't always used to its best capabilities. If any game had the option of controlling mainly with the D-pad or the touchscreen, I chose the D-pad every time. There were some standouts like Rhythm Heaven and WarioWare that did a good job with it though. The biggest flaw of the original design was the size, but the DS Lite redesign turned it into what it should have always been. An amazing library of first and third-party titles, an affordable mid-gen redesign, and an attractive price point puts the original DS in the top 10. Out of all the devices on this list, the PS Vita may be the one that really should have been a massive success. It had so many great features and games, but some embarrassing boners from Sony gimped the device right out of the gate, forcing it to start its lifespan with nearly no momentum. Featuring some crazy graphical capabilities and an OLED touchscreen, the Vita is a super slick handheld. It had some great games as well in Persona 4 Golden, that was exclusive to the Vita for 100 years before getting re-released on Steam. Gravity Rush is a property that I see a lot of people hope gets a sequel, and Rayman Origins, whose color palette and animation made the Vita screen look incredible. As for the boners, Sony sold 2 different units at launch, a Wi-Fi Vita and a 3G Vita. The issue with the 3G Vita is it was locked to AT&T in the United States, a phone company with a notoriously bad reputation. This was hardware locked, so there was no way to change carriers. When this was revealed at E3 2011, there were audible groans and laughs from the audience.
And we'll be partnering with AT&T as the exclusive carrier for PlayStation Vita in the United States.
I'm over here stroking my dick. I got lotion on my...
The sack of the boner was Sony insisting on using incredibly expensive proprietary storage media. They couldn't just use standard SD cards, they had a design made specifically for the Vita, meaning no third-party manufacturers like SanDisk or Samsung could offer alternatives. The price of a 32 gig card at launch was $93, nearly 3 times the price of other SD cards of the same capacity. Locking the Vita to AT&T and the ridiculous price of storage greatly harmed the Vita right out of the gate. Total lifetime sales are estimated to sit around 17 million units, nowhere near the PSP's 80 million. The reason I place the Vita so high on this list is its library and features. If Sony didn't fuck itself in the ass with some of the dumbest decisions they could have possibly made, the Vita would have ended up a commercial success. The Vita has become a homebrew paradise, with its entire library as well as classic console emulators, all easily software moddable. So it's become a great handheld for those willing to sail the high seas and enjoy an awesome OLED screen. Probably the handheld that has aged the most poorly on this entire list when it comes to original hardware, the Game Boy deserves a high spot regardless of its downsides. The impact this thing had on the entire gaming industry and pop culture as a whole can't be denied. Launching at only $100 USD in 1989, it was the very first gaming handheld, at least in my opinion, that was ever actually worth buying. A few portable gaming devices launched before the Game Boy, but none of them managed to hit the mainstream like Nintendo did. The Game Boy was so ubiquitous with handheld gaming that old people continued to call every handheld ever made a Game Boy, well after the line was discontinued. Tetris took off thanks to the Game Boy and eventually went on to be possibly the best-selling video game of all time, if you fudge the numbers a little bit. The Game Boy was also home to the original generation of Pokemon games, a series that itself would go on to take over pop culture in North America and Japan for decades, and is still incredibly popular today. When it comes to age, the original hardware kinda sucks if I'm being honest. The screen is famously known for being really hard to see. The only way to improve visibility was with a shitty contrast slider. Until the Game Boy Pocket came out, we were stuck with this heavy-ass brick that only fit in the pockets of the most pop and fresh jorts. It also took 4 AA batteries to power, though it could run for nearly 30 hours on fresh ones. In terms of durability, the original Game Boy seems to be at Nokia levels of indestructible. There's the one unit that famously survived a bombing during the Gulf War. Wire tested it with a 15-foot drop and smashing it with a sledgehammer, after which it still functioned. Odds are the original Game Boy would continue to live on and function perfectly well long after most modern devices die. I know the top of this list is going to be Nintendo heavy, but despite all their faults, they make good handhelds. The Nintendo Switch hit at just the right time to make full AAA games possible on a small device while also not costing over $1,000. The horsepower of the Switch is considered weak by many, even at its launch, but I think Nintendo hit the mark with the compromise between price, performance, and battery life. The fact that all of The Witcher 3 is playable on this thing, despite its many drawbacks, show just how well a game can be optimized on weaker hardware should developers choose to do so. The library is so well fleshed out and filled to the brim with variety that I would argue it's still worth buying an original Switch over the Switch 2 in 2026. It just has so much content available for it. I know a lot of people would disagree with the Switch's placement being so high, but I really think it deserves it considering just what developers are able to accomplish on it with such weak hardware. It's also Nintendo's highest-selling handheld ever at 155 million units, surpassing even the DS. So plenty of units will be available in the secondhand market for decades to come. The hacking and homebrew scene for the Switch is also just getting started, so what's possible in the system will be pushed even further down the line. I may be a little biased towards the GBA since I personally have so many great memories with the device. It's the first game console I ever bought with my own money that I earned mowing lawns as a kid. I believe the Game Boy Advance is the best handheld console of all time. The original iteration hit the portable aspect perfectly. It was small enough to fit in your pocket and take pretty much anywhere, though it did lack a backlight for the screen, which is the original version's biggest downfall. In 2003, Nintendo released the GBA SP. To this day, one of the coolest handheld gaming consoles ever. Clamshell design was unique and protected the screen. It was super portable, and it finally had a backlight, the perfect way to take advantage of the GBA's library. A few Pokemon games, of course, but also portable versions of Super Mario World, 2 Fire Emblem games, the best Sonic the Hedgehog games that had been released in years at the time, a remake of the first Metroid game, tons of amazing JRPGs, all available to play anywhere. The Game Boy Advance hit the G-spot when it came to release timing and library. Perfect hardware for portable play that was powerful enough to provide 16-bit console-like experiences in your pocket. The games were more fleshed out than older consoles, but not too complex that they couldn't be played for shorter sessions, and the hardware wasn't pushing so hard it was draining batteries like crazy. I believe the Game Boy Advance is the best portable gaming console of all time. That's my list of the top 10 gaming handhelds of all time. If you liked the video, I'd greatly appreciate a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you all in the next one.